Good evening. I think we've had an excellent day. I'll probably say two excellent days with respect to the discussions we've had. My task this afternoon is to give a summary of what we've pretty much gone through today, and then before we go on into the closing session. So today we started off in the morning with a keynote presentation from Michael Kende on the African internet economy, and looking at basically looking at some work that Michael is a paper that Michael is working on the internet economy in Africa. Through his presentation, there were a couple of things that came out strongly to me, and I'm sure each one of you was able to pick one or two things. First, to me, it was quite interesting to see that the GDP ratio of ICT in the US is at 7%, and for OECD countries is at 6%. I thought it was always much higher than that, but it was quite interesting to see where it is. And equally, to see that from the way we've looked at it traditionally, that thinking that more ICT means the impact that you have is to those ICT companies, but actually the companies that tend to benefit the most are the traditional businesses when they go online, and that's where this really has a huge impact. And equally, from the data that Michael was presented, it was quite clear that from the amount of transactions held, about 10% of that is what goes to business to customers, while the majority of the 22 trillion goes to business environment, or rather transactions. So that was quite interesting from an overview, and also in terms of guiding discussions that we will have going forward, is realizing that where the actual impact lies is between business to business transactions, and business to customers is something that sort of doesn't take a significant portion of that, but equally has an impact. So it's good to see those statistics from elsewhere, and know that as we're going into the future of e-commerce or the internet economy, those are the key areas that we need to pay attention to in understanding how the dynamics work. In addition to that, Michael did cover something, the impact that is being created by the intermediaries, the various platforms, and how that is panning out. But with the particular interest of something I caught was that only 32% of the companies that are established or registered, being enterprises, I guess, which have at least 5 people employed, have a website. And I think, in my own personal view, most of those companies do, even if they have a website, I'll be very curious to know what's on that website. Some of them may just actually have static websites that have not been updated for many years. So it will be useful to evaluate that going forward and see how that can be transformed. So that was quite an interesting stage-setting presentation we got from Michael this morning. And the subsequent discussions or panel sessions, which sort of took a deep dive into those discussions, into that keynote rather, was a look at the innovation hubs, which was presented by Martin from Kenya, showing the number of tech hubs. I was pleasantly surprised to see that there are at least 314 tech hubs in the region, in 93 cities, and in 42 countries. That's almost 80% of Africa, which is quite extensive and means that the reach is there. And of course, the many hubs, what is coming out of these hubs, we were able to see what's coming out of these hubs in terms of applications, solutions, trying to address some of the local challenges that are faced in those regions. We also got a presentation from the Kenyan government with respect to how they are trying to address the issues from the internet economy point of view, looking at the many services that they've brought online, and also trying to deal with the other challenge that comes with taking the services online, which is to do with cybercrime. I think those must go hand in hand, that the moment you go online, then you have to deal with cybercrime. So that was interesting. I actually did not think it was quite a major issue to them at this point in time, but it's interesting to see that they are actually facing that. We also got a presentation from Irembo in Rwanda, about how they're working to digitize the Rwanda government. And for me in particular, I thought the number of 250,000 transactions per month was quite telling in the opportunity and the demand, because that means it's, you know, if you were to look at it from an activity, human activity point of view, those are 250,000 trips to a government office that were saved. So going forward in improving efficiency, then this is becoming a critical aspect of the future of how we do business and engage with government. I like the targets that were presented by Rwanda. They have about 50 services online now. They are targeting about 100 by the end of the year, and looking at, by the end of 2018, having about 400 of these government services online. I think it's quite ambitious, and I hope that they will be able to accomplish this, because then we are able to showcase the success of Rwanda and Kenya and for other governments to be able to adopt this. It looks like they've thought through this process very carefully. They were able to showcase how they plan to reach that target, and how they also plan to get more people to use the system through their various channels for communication. After that, we had another session this afternoon. We went for the roundtable discussions, and I'll be inviting my colleague shortly just to give us a summary from the roundtable sessions. Before we do that, I'll jump over to this afternoon, where we had a panel discussing where we had 4 participants from the African Union, UNECA, and Richter, and in that session they were talking about the future of the internet economy in Africa. So in that presentation, we had Mokhtar talking about the way the African Union sees the digital revolution, and how it's going to impact the mission and vision of the African Union, and also the role that the African Union sees traditional leaders playing in achieving the digital economy. It was quite a thought-provoking presentation, identifying the 3 key areas, or the 3 key leaders or individuals who need to play an active role in championing this, being the leaders, the innovators, and the entrepreneurs. We also got a presentation from UNECA that also looked at the components of SDGs, basically how we should be viewing the issue of ICT implementation with respect to IDGs, and taking note that the ICT itself will be facilitating the implementation of those SDGs. And Ida was very eloquent in how she broke up the various SDGs and the roles that they play, and in fact looking at some of the areas where we need to think about things like smart grids and the use of IoTs in some of those SDGs, like the one that looks at water and so on. 2 of her closing points were with respect to paying closer attention to the enabling policy, which is going to be a key fundamental factor of how we're going to implement ICTs. Without the enabling policy, then a lot of the SDGs are going to be hampered, because they are largely dependent on the implementation of SDGs. And also focusing on the key rollout, ICT rollout, being key to achieving the SDGs. So not just the policy, but also making sure that the actual rollout of the ICT takes place at all levels. We also got a presentation from Richter, and the focus of the presentation from Richter was on the Rwanda web hosting project, based on the study that had been done, the impact that they had seen with respect to local hosting, and why Rwanda feels that it is important for many organizations in Rwanda to look at local hosting. And in particular for this presentation, and I like the graph, or rather the image that Gila put up, which was showing the partnerships, and it is not just private partnership, it's a multi-stakeholder partnerships between private sector and government and academia to be able to achieve this Rwanda web hosting project. So I think that's the key takeaway I got from that particular presentation, is that going at it alone will probably not get you there, but if you are able to bring all the stakeholders together, then you'll be able to achieve the goal of local hosting and growing local hosting as an industry and also as an ecosystem in your country. So we do look forward to hearing more in the future, and hopefully we can use Rwanda as well as a case study for what others should be able to do. Lastly, we had a presentation from ILO, and what was interesting from the presentation from ILO is getting to see how the future or the current ICTs have impacted the way we work, in terms of the work, how we work, the number of hours we work, how we look at labor laws. When you don't have a direct employer, how does that affect your way of work? Who looks after your rights? What kind of rights are you apply to you as an employee who doesn't have a direct employer in this kind of environment? And it was also very interesting to see some of the work that the ILO is looking at with respect to the future of work from both a quality and quantity perspective, and in covering some of the 7 areas and actually the 3 key areas that they are looking at with respect to the future of work. So that sort of covers most of the presentations we got today. I'm pretty sure at a personal level you were able to find other key points that you thought were touched you personally or had an impact on you personally. So it'd be nice if you found that useful. Please find a way of sharing that with us as well, or on social media. We would definitely appreciate that. And before I close, I would like to invite my newest colleague, Mr. Verengai Mabika, who's been spending time with the roundtable discussions, to just give us an overview of what the messages he got from the 2 roundtable sessions we had today. Verengai.
Thank you, Michuki, and pleasant afternoon, colleagues. I'll quickly just these are just quick highlights of some of the discussions we had from the 2 breakaway sessions. Quickly, the first breakaway session was just looking at the current state, or sort of an assessment of the current state of things, and the discussions were mostly guided by the 3 topics that looks at business adoption and usage of internet, and also a very strong focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, because I think even from the morning session there was quite some discussion on how we should promote innovation, internet innovation and entrepreneurship in Africa. And just to touch on some of the questions and some of the points that came from the discussions, particularly relating to the current state assessment and how business adoption and usage of internet, looking at some of the requirements of business to go online compared to individuals. I think the sticking point that came out from the discussions were mostly around cost and security. So the interesting aspect of the requirement that business would need to go online, we mostly focused around the cost implications, whilst for individuals we're more around their security and privacy. And then of course on innovation, there was some discussions on attracting opportunities for entrepreneurs in Africa, and some of the noticeable industries or sectors that were discussed were the telecoms industry. And in that group, the colleagues mentioned that Africa is still a very young market and a very vibrant market because of its youthful population, and there are quite huge opportunities when it comes to promoting entrepreneurs to tap into those opportunities. And there was also a discussion on the challenges that entrepreneurs are likely to face when they take their businesses online. And some of the noticeable points were around the capital or the finances that are needed to promote such innovations from mostly young entrepreneurs. The other challenges that were mentioned were also around a supportive ecosystem that stretches beyond the finances, but marketing, mentorship, and also just the knowledge to promote or to support the young entrepreneurs. The second breakaway sessions were mostly focusing on the internet, the future of the internet economy, and again we're guided by some questions that were structured. The first group looking at development of the internet sector, and the second group looking at again innovation and entrepreneurship, and the third group looking at the internet economy. Looking at the development of the internet sector and how we see the internet economy developing in Africa, the discussion is especially around the issues of access and content. The first group had discussions around a demand-driven growth, both in content and in access. These points that I'm sharing here are not exhaustive. We are still in the process of capturing all of them. But they also looked at a supportive policy environment that comprehensively pick on all ICT issues from all the sectors, and I think it relates or resonates quite well with the presentation we had on the SDGs, where there was an attempt to pick how ICTs can be used to sort of activate some of the indicators or targets around the SDGs. On the innovation and entrepreneurship, again, the discussion was around entrepreneurship development in Africa and what we need to do. Some of the points that came out were encouraging our academic institutions or our universities and colleges to actively steer growth in the entrepreneurship and innovation space, and also getting the concept or the principles of innovation from a very early stage. So we're looking at getting our young people, even from as young as kindergarten, just to get those principles and values instilled in young people. Opportunities are Africans seeing opportunities in entrepreneurship and innovation. The discussion in that group noted that we are not as there yet. There are indications that there is some innovation and entrepreneurship going on, but we still have a long way to go, and the opportunities are huge. But there is, we still need to steer that ecosystem and get more and more young people to be able to identify the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much, Berengai. I also just remember that I did not mention one particular presentation that was done by Alex Masika from BRIC, updating about the innovative startups in Kenya and what also they are doing at BRIC, which sort of helped showcase a lot of what is going on in Kenya. So I think that sort of provides an overview of what happened today and what happened in the roundtables as well. And as mentioned yesterday by my colleague Constance, a lot of this information is going to go into the reports, the work that is being done. In particular, the work from the roundtables is going to be taken in by Michael Kende. So we are reaching out to the session rapporteurs and moderators to make sure that we get the input, all the input from the roundtable discussions, so that we can use this to complete the report, and hopefully it will be launched in the next couple of weeks. I think our target is AIS in Nairobi for the launch of the report. So the input from here is very critical to us being able to successfully launch those reports with, and I have to insist, with your input. That's really a key goal for this particular session that we had today. So with that, I would like to conclude here and hand it over back to Bethel. Thank you very much.